The bullet that wore the sheriff's name. Dawn comes thin and colorless over a town that no longer trusts its own windows. The wind moves first, slipping down the main street as if it knows the doors will not open, rattling shutters that have learned to tremble and keep quiet. Somewhere a hinge complains, somewhere a horse stamps, but the morning holds itself back. It is the kind of cold that sinks through cloth and into bone, the kind of light that turns the world into outlines and decisions. Arizona Territory, late autumn. The night storm passed hours ago, but the air still smells of iron and wet dust, as if memory has weight. A jay calls once from the cottonwood by the well, and then thinks better of it. Silence is older than sound here. Inside a narrow kitchen with a lopsided window, a woman stands at a basin that used to hold apples in harvest time. Her hands shake in a way no one taught them to, a way the body learns when it has been carried too far and too long. The cloth in her fingers is grey with lie and grief. She scrubs at the front of her dress, working the dark patches where blood dried thick and stubborn. Not her husband's blood, though the town says so. The stains came from the sheriff, the one man who knew every secret road into this valley, the one man who could make a mob wait. The water turns the color of a bad memory, and when she lifts the cloth to wring it out, her wrists tremble again. Breath in, breath out. Her mind knows the count. 4 beats in, 6 out. The way a midwife once taught her to slow a racing heart, to tell the frightened animal inside the ribs that there is time. The mind tries. The body listens only a little. She does not cry. There is no space for that. Instead, she studies the small things that keep a person from breaking outright. The thin blue vein crossing her knuckle, the thread she pulled loose from the hem and twisted into a ring, the chipped bowl that always wobbles when set down. Micro-actions. A quiet science of surviving the hour in front of you. She dips the cloth again. She presses harder. She whispers nothing, because nothing is safest. When the knock comes, it does not sound like a request. 2 men in coats the color of dust stand in the doorway, with faces a shade older than yesterday. One carries the law in his voice, the other carries it in his posture. They do not ask for permission. They take the space and the air and the last good thought she had left. Outside, the street remembers how to look at people. A woman across the way lifts her curtain 2 inches, then lets it fall. A boy stops sweeping the saloon porch and leans on his broom like he has all the time in the world to learn about the nature of fear. The men lead her into the open. No shackles, mercy, or calculation, but their hands hover near her elbows, and the space between their palms and her coat feels like a kind of rope. The jail door clangs the way iron always does when it wants to be heard. Not for justice, not today. The sound is the weight of a decision that refuses to explain itself. It echoes down the hallway and settles into the stone floor, where it will live for years. She steps into the cell and the air changes. Jails have a smell that belongs to no other room. Damp straw, old sweat, oil from a lantern that was trimmed by a man with a steady hand. She sits on the edge of the cot and keeps her back straight, as if posture could be proof of innocence. When the deputy takes her name, she says nothing at all. He writes anyway, his pencil awkward in his fingers, his eyes too careful. He has seen the body. He has seen the blood where it was and where it was not. He places the ledger aside and closes it gently, like a book you are not done with, but cannot bear to keep reading. On the sheriff's desk, the badge sits crooked, collecting dust and flies, because even grief is practical in a town like this. And next to it lies the small piece of thunder that started all the new silences, a single silver bullet, bright as a boiled bone, its surface scratched with marks that do not belong to chance. The scratches are careful, like writing from a man who never learned to read, but understood how to send a message anyway. Only one person in the county carves like that. Only one hand has that habit, that rhythm, that pride hidden inside meanness. The deputy looks at the bullet and then away from it, the way a man looks past a mirror when he does not want to know what his face is doing. Time changes inside a cell. Minutes do not pass. They circle. The body keeps score of each small thing, heartbeat, breath, the press of wood against the back of the knees, and finds patterns where the mind finds blame. She notices the way the draft slips under the door and licks at her ankles, the way the knot in the cot rope creaks every 5th breath, as if counting along with her. She notices her hands. Tremor is not weakness, she tells herself. It is the nerve's way of shaking loose the cold. She imagines the inside of her chest, the ribs like fence slats, the heart like a skittish colt that needs a softer voice. She gives it one. You are here. You are still here. The words are not prayer and not science, but something in between, a small bridge in a hard land. Outside, the town begins its morning routine as if Sunday had come early. The saloon opens 2 hours before honest work, because gossip works a longer day than cattle. Voices braid and unbraid, the way people do when no one wants to own a thought outright. A laugh skips and dies. A chair scrapes. Heard she did it with her own hands. Heard she found him already dying. Heard there was a letter. The stage never arrives this early, but rumor thunders in on an empty road and makes all the noise a body could want. At the church, the pastor polishes his glasses and rewrites his sermon without changing a word. Forgiveness is a door he can point to but never force open. In the mercantile, the shopkeeper counts coins by habit and sets aside the dull ones that feel like pity in the hand. He will not take her money when the time comes. That too is a way of passing judgment while pretending not to. The deputy returns with a tin cup and slides it across the bars. It scrapes metal the whole way, a sound that sets the teeth on edge and then settles into the jaw like a bruise. He does not meet her eyes. He asks nothing. He stands there a beat too long and then leaves, his boots careful on the floorboards, as if silence could be a kindness if you handle it like glass. The cup is dented in 2 places, old damage that fits 2 fingers if a person needs to hold on to something. She does. She studies the dent, the way pressure changes shape and still leaves the thing itself. She thinks about how a brain under siege will reach for patterns, for meanings, for anything that makes the next breath make sense. She lets the thought pass like a cloud. She is not here to solve the mind. She is here to survive it. Rain begins again, without bothering the sky first. It drums on the tin roof and fills the space with a sound like steady hands on a tired body. The sound pulls memory from the dark. Winter nights before the marriage, the smell of tobacco, and the clean sting of soap on cold skin, the rhythm of a conversation that never had to raise its voice to be heard. She swallows. She presses her thumb into the fabric at her knee until the muscle answers back. Awareness, then release. The nervous system is a skittish horse. If you pull, it bolts. If you lead, it follows. She breathes into the tightness and lets the jaw unclench by degrees. These are quiet mercies no one sees. Across the hall, the sheriff's logbook sits where a tidy man left it. A pencil lies at a diagonal, a small proof of intention interrupted. The pages hold lines of names and fines and refusals, and also the hidden notes a working peace officer learns to keep, who looked left when they should have looked right, who sold more bullets than a week of coyotes requires, who carved their initials into something they had no business owning. Later, someone will notice a page is missing. Later, someone will pretend not to know how easy paper is to tear and fold and slide into a breast pocket. For now, the book rests. For now, the bullet gleams. For now, the town rehearses its alibis the way a choir hums before the hymn. She closes her eyes and feels the map of the room without looking. The cot's coarse blanket, the wall's cool grit against the back of her hand, the lantern's soft breath, a pulse of flame that lifts and lowers the way a chest does when no one is watching. She imagines the road beyond the jail, how it curves north and rises toward a ridge where rain comes first and leaves last. She imagines hoofprints filling with water, then brimming, then smoothing over as if nothing had ever passed that way. She does not imagine rescue. She imagines a choice: speak and be turned into someone else's story, or keep her silence and remain whole enough to walk out when the time comes. She chooses the only strength that does not need witnesses. She chooses quiet. In the office, the silver bullet waits. It does not change shape under light. It keeps its carvings the way a man keeps his habits, thoughtlessly, faithfully, until the day those habits draw a straight line back to him. The deputy wipes at a fly, misses and tries again. He is not cruel. He is tired. He lifts the badge by the edge, sets it straight, and then crooks it once more, as if balance would be a lie today. Through the front windows, the town watches itself in the glass. People learn early to love a story that keeps their own hands clean. By noon, the rain thins to a mist that hangs like breath close to the ground. A dog wanders past the jail door and pauses, as if he knows the difference between a room that holds a person and a room that holds a verdict. He sniffs, circles, lies down. He will wait as long as the body beside him once waited at back doors for scraps. Waiting is a kind of knowing. Inside, the woman rests her palms on her thighs and lets the weight of them bring her back into the present, into the small, good truth that a person is more than the worst half hour of her life. Her shoulders drop. The breath deepens. A new stillness finds the edges of the cell and takes a seat. Afternoon fades without drama. The light goes soft, the way it does when a day is about to surrender to whatever comes next. The wind returns from someplace it had to be, and with it a few loose words from the street, names said under breath, a laugh that doesn't taste right, the scrape of a chair pulled too close to a door. Somewhere a widow bakes a small loaf and wraps it in cloth, and remembers a young deputy who used to tip his hat at shadows. Somewhere a gunsmith closes his shop early because a certain kind of metal carries an old debt on its back, and he can feel it in his fingers today. Somewhere a rider chooses a road and does not let himself think twice. Evening approaches like a slow decision. The town holds its posture, the way a back holds when a man tries to look taller than he is. Inside the cell, nothing moves, and in that stillness something steady grows. Not hope, not yet. Something quieter. The sense that the body and the soul are on speaking terms again. The woman lifts her face and listens to the rain die on the roof. In that thinning drum she hears a truth that does not accuse and does not excuse. The storm has passed, but the ground is still wet. If you run now, you will slip. If you stand, you will know where your feet truly are. She stands, not to pace, not to call out, not to plead. She stands to feel the floor. She stands to be counted by herself. Night will come. The rope will be talked about in rooms that pretend the word is prayer. The bullet will shine in the lamp and dare the guilty heart to blink. The badge will tilt, then right itself, then tilt again. But for this breath, for this minute that is bigger than its size, the town goes quiet and the cell holds steady. The day has said what it wanted. The woman has not answered. And in the space between the saying and the answering, the story takes its first true shape. The jail was colder at night, though the fire in the potbelly stove had long died to ash. Stone walls sweated in the damp, and the air hung heavy with the faint odor of rust and loneliness. She sat on the narrow cot, skirt hem still stained in the sheriff's blood, though most of it had faded into a dull brown. The sound of her own breathing was the only proof she was still here, still waiting. Every hour, like a clock with no hands, the tin cup slid against the bars, slow, deliberate, the sound grating and hollow. She wasn't sure if she did it to remind herself she was alive, or to prove that someone out there might hear. On the desk across the room, the sheriff's badge lay in the same place it had been since the night they brought her in, its edge catching the faint morning light through the barred window. A fly circled it, landed, then rose again, like it couldn't decide if it belonged to the living or the dead. The deputy passed by sometimes, boots soft on the worn plank floor, but he never met her eyes. He carried his own silence, and in that silence she recognized something, knowledge kept back not for her sake, but for his own survival. He would not speak of what he'd seen. He would not ask her what she knew. Hours blurred. The air in the cell grew thick with waiting. She wrapped her shawl tighter, though the cold had already sunk into her bones. Outside, a wagon passed, wheels crunching on hard-packed dirt, and voices rose faint in the distance. The town was moving on without her, as towns do. Yet here, in this square of stone and shadow, time stayed still. Somewhere beyond the walls, the truth waited too, etched into the scratches of a single silver bullet. She didn't know yet if that truth would save her or bury her deeper, etched into the scratches of a single silver bullet. She didn't know yet if that truth would save her or bury her deeper. Outside the jailhouse, the world seemed to hum with a different kind of life, one that could turn warm or cold with the tilt of a single whisper. In the saloon, voices braided themselves into the low clink of glasses, and rumor moved quicker than the whiskey. A man at the far table leaned in, his voice low but certain, speaking as if the truth were something you could carve into wood. Another man laughed, not because the story was funny, but because fear and laughter sometimes wear the same face. Across the street, the pastor's voice rose from the small clapboard church, his sermon winding through words about forgiveness, though his eyes kept sweeping the pews as if searching for the sin no one dared to name. He spoke to the walls as much as to the people, his cadence soft and deliberate, like a man offering absolution to himself. In the general store, the air smelled of flour dust and lamp oil. The shopkeeper stood behind the counter, stacking sacks with slow precision. When she stepped inside once before, he'd refused her coins. Not with spite, but with a kind of pity that stripped the value from them. It was the pity of a man who sees someone already halfway buried and will not profit from the rest of the descent. Every corner of town seemed to know her name, but carry it differently. On some tongues a curse, on others a wound. And though she could not walk those streets, she could feel them through the walls of the cell, the way a body can feel a storm long before it breaks. Somewhere beyond, the bullet waited. The hands that carved it still lived, and the town, whether it wanted to or not, was holding its breath. And the town, whether it wanted to or not, was holding its breath. The next morning came grey and cold, with a thin mist clinging to the ground like it feared being burned away. She sat on the cot, hands folded in her lap, when the soft thud of footsteps crossed the wooden floor outside her cell. They were slower than the deputies, lighter than the sheriff's had ever been. A figure appeared in the doorway, a woman, older, hair drawn back in a knot streaked with white. She didn't speak her name, didn't offer explanation. Instead, she carried a small loaf of bread wrapped in a faded cloth, setting it gently on the worn bench just inside the bars. The scent reached her before the memory did. Fresh bread mixed with the faint tang of tobacco and the clean bite of soap. For a moment, she was pulled backward in time, to winters when the nights were long and the fire warm, before her marriage had turned to something colder than the season itself. The older woman's eyes met hers, steady but unreadable. No judgment, no comfort, just the quiet weight of someone who had carried their own share of truths they never voiced. She could have asked the question, did you do it for him or for yourself? But it hung unspoken between them, the kind of question that might unravel both women if answered. Without another word, the widow turned and left, the echo of her steps fading into the morning stillness. Alone again, she reached for the bread but didn't eat right away. She traced the weave of the cloth with her fingers, feeling the small frayed edge where it had been mended, and thought of how certain things, like people, can be torn, stitched, and still hold together. Somewhere in that quiet, the truth pressed closer, and the weight of the bullet in her memory grew heavier. Somewhere in that quiet, the truth pressed closer, and the weight of the bullet in her memory grew heavier. Across town, the rain had returned, soft at first, then insistent, striking the tin rooftops with a rhythm that seemed to conceal more than it revealed. In the dim light of the gunsmith's shop, a man with hands worn by decades of metalwork turned the silver bullet over in his palm. The moment his eyes caught the pattern of scratches along its side, the color drained from his face. He didn't need to ask who had made them. He already knew. He had carved those marks himself years ago, for a man who swore every shot would be measured, righteous and rare. The bullet now sat like a piece of old debt, cold and accusing. He placed it on the counter, but didn't take his hand away, as if releasing it would make the truth louder. Outside, the rain thickened, hiding the quick, purposeful footsteps in the back alley behind the shop. Someone moved there with the care of a person who knows which boards creak and which shadows hold. Back in the sheriff's office, a logbook lay open, its neat columns disrupted by a single torn edge where a page had been removed. That missing sheet, gone without smudge or splinter, might have been nothing, or it might have been the hinge on which the entire trial would turn, and though no one spoke of it aloud, the absence hung in the air like the scent of smoke, long after the fire has gone cold. In the cell she felt it, an invisible shift in the world beyond her walls, as if somewhere in a room she could not reach, a truth had begun to wake. As if somewhere, in a room she could not reach, a truth had begun to wake. By nightfall, the air had thickened with the scent of rain-soaked earth and the kind of tension that makes a man check his rifle twice. Lanterns flickered to life along Main Street, their glow bending in the wind. People began to gather in front of the jail, some drawn by justice, others by something harder and darker to name. Their faces were lit from below, every line sharpened, every shadow deepened. The murmur of the crowd rose and fell, a restless tide of half-formed accusations. Boots shifted in the mud. A rope, coiled and heavy, passed from one set of hands to another. Overhead, the sky flashed white, and the sudden crack of thunder rolled through the street, silencing voices mid-sentence. All eyes turned toward the northern road. Out of the darkness, a lone rider emerged, rain slicking his coat, his hat pulled low against the wind. He rode slow, each step of the horse measured, deliberate. When he reached the hitching post, he swung down without hurry, the weight of his presence pressing against the night. From his shoulder he slid a rifle and laid it across the post, not aimed, not hidden, just there, as if daring anyone to touch it. No one moved. The lanterns hissed in the damp air. The rope sagged slightly, its threat not gone but waiting. Inside her cell she couldn't see the rider's face, but she felt the shift in the air, the way a storm sometimes carries with it the possibility of a break in the clouds. Still the silver bullet in her memory kept its weight, and the night was far from done. Still the silver bullet in her memory kept its weight, and the night was far from done. The cell was dark now, save for the thin amber glow that seeped in from the deputy's lamp down the hall. She sat on the cot, fingers tracing the grain of the wood beneath her, when her hand brushed the edge of something wedged deep under the thin mattress. She pulled it free, a worn Bible, its leather cracked from years of handling. It was heavier than it should have been. Opening it, she found a folded piece of paper, tucked tight against the spine, the edges softened by time. The ink had blurred in places, the lines trembling as if written by someone whose hands would not steady. She read the first few lines in silence. There were no direct confessions, no plain truth spelled out. Instead, the spaces between the words spoke louder than the sentences themselves, pauses where something had been meant, then left unsaid. Near the bottom, a name had been scratched away until only a faint ghost of the letters remained. The last visible words just above the torn edge were, "Yours." The paper trembled in her grip, though she told herself it was only from the chill. Folding it again, she slid it back into the Bible, pressing it into place as though it belonged to the shadows more than the light. Outside, the rain eased into a whisper, and the crowd's murmur shifted into something more uncertain. But in the quiet of her cell, the letter stayed, carrying a truth meant to remain hidden until someone was willing to bear its weight. Until someone was willing to bear its weight. By the time the morning came, the street outside had emptied of its restless voices. The lanterns were out, the rope gone, the mud hardened by a pale sun that gave no warmth. The jail door creaked open without ceremony. No verdict was read. No hands reached to pull her out. She stepped into the light alone, the sound of her boots on the wooden porch the only announcement of her freedom. The town did not gather to watch her leave, but she could feel the weight of unseen eyes through half-open curtains and cracks in the shutters. She walked without looking for them, past the sheriff's grave on the rise beyond the churchyard. She did not pause. Her gaze stayed fixed on the road ahead, though her fingers curled around the small cold shape in her pocket, the silver bullet, its scratches worn smooth by her touch. A lean, dust-colored dog rose from where it had been lying in the shade of the livery and fell into step beside her. She never called to it, never looked down, yet it kept pace as if it had always belonged to the road she was taking. The sky was low and gold, the kind that makes every shadow long. At the edge of town she turned once, not to the people or the buildings, but to the gallows frame against the setting sun. The wood stood silent, its shadow stretching across the dirt to meet hers. And for a moment, it looked as if there were two walking away instead of one. Then the wind shifted, and the road opened ahead, carrying her toward whatever waited beyond the horizon.